Hey everyone, it's Alexius here from Exile Entertainment. In this video, I'm going to explain to you how I started my production company at the age of 27. Now, before I get started, I want to let you know that spots are available for our Producing Accelerator program that helps filmmakers like you consistently finance and produce your own films so that you can start to build your own production company and your own career in the film industry. So if you're interested in learning more about that program, stick around until the end of this video. And for the best filmmaking advice, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to be notified when we post a video. Before I tell you how I started my production company, I'm going to first tell you why I started my production company. And the reason that I did that from a personal level is because it became apparent to me while I was at university. I was actually not at film school. I went and studied commerce and law at university, and I started producing my brother's films. So he was at film school, and I knew going into university that it was likely that I wanted to go into business, to run my own business, but I had no idea what that would look like or in which industry I would go into. And then once I started producing my brother's films, it was just like immediately I knew that that was how I wanted to apply the skills that I was learning at university, but in another industry. And it became apparent to me that that was the business that I wanted to start. So that was the starting point for me. And that was really the first thing, or the catalyst that led to me then starting a production company. So at first it was really me wanting to use my skills in an industry outside of just law or traditional business, to use those skills in a creative industry. Once I had then made my first short film, and second short film, and then actually first feature film, it was at that point that I decided, okay, I'd like to go at this full time now, and I'd like to start my own company so that I can start producing films independently. So that was the why, and I think that this is a really important thing to think about if you're in the industry and you're thinking about starting a production company. It's important to think about whether you actually want to be running a business, because what happens very quickly when you start a production company is that you have to do a lot of things that have nothing to do with actually producing films, right? There's accounting, legals, there's the finance side of it, there's managing people, there's basically there's a lot of admin that you have to do. So there's a lot of new things that come into the equation and really start becoming your job. And that is on top of you having to produce the film. So if you are looking to start a production company at some point, you definitely want to ask yourself, do I want to be running a business, or do I just want to be either directing or producing films? Because if you just want to be directing or producing films, it is worth thinking about whether you need to start a production company, or whether you're better off simply working on those individual films, either when they come up, or perhaps working with a more established company, and basically, really just then focusing on the producing side or the directing side. For me though, it was clear to me that I did want to start a business and run a business. And so I kind of fell into, the film industry through my brother, and then realized that actually, it was an industry that I was passionate about. And it was an industry that I could, transfer the skills that I'd been developing into that new industry. So that's the why of why I ended up starting my production company. Okay, so once it became apparent to me that I did want to start a production company and kind of throw myself into the film industry full time, the first thing that I did, or one of the first things that I did, was to come up with a name. And it's funny because, it's when you think about it, it's actually not the most important part of the process. But I think especially when you're starting your own business and it's your first business, the name holds a lot of weight, and it is something that's important to you. So for me, the name Exile came about because I was really looking for a name that would kind of encapsulate things like being independent or defiant, or perhaps rebellious. And the reason I'm using these words is because a lot of the films that I'm drawn to are more kind of either hard-hitting dramas or even hard-hitting genre films. And I'm kind of drawn to that edgier content. And so I really wanted the name or the brand to be aligned with that. At that stage of my career, I think I started Exile just after we picked up the feature film Love, which was Gaspar Noé's film. So I was really conscious that, those are the types of films that I was interested in. And so I wanted the brand to represent that. And so somewhere along the line, when I was trying to come up with a name, I was listening to my favorite album at the time, which is an album called Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. And it kind of just clicked that Exile would be a great name. And what's interesting is the Stones made that album while they were actually in exile from the British government, I believe, to do with paying tax. And they holed up in this mansion in the south of France and made this record, which was an extremely bluesy, kind of American style record. And so this idea of artists being in exile and creating, for the Stones, I think it's one of their best albums, but even just generally being in exile, what that means as an artist and the type of work that you would create in exile. So, if you're an artist or a thinker, then, or even a politician, right? Someone like Napoleon, or thinkers like Socrates, if you're in exile, it's because you're against the status quo. And so that's something that was really interesting to me as an idea. And then the idea of creating your best work in exile was something that was really interesting. And the more I looked into it, I saw that actually a lot of artists had done things like that. You look at people like, or bands like the Beatles when they made Sgt. Pepper's, while they weren't exiled in India, going to India and kind of being away and being separated from their usual environment allowed them to create something special. Same with David Bowie and Iggy Pop when they were in Berlin. There was great music created as a result of that. So I wanted Exile to be this company that would make films and hopefully in the future TV that was challenging, right? It was going against the status quo. And the hope was also that Exile could become a company where artists could trust that they could go to and create some of their best work. That's a philosophy that is not something that we just say. Every time we work with a creative, they have full creative control over their work. So that's something that's really important to us, because we want the company to be a place somewhere where they can go and trust that they can create their best work, obviously with our help, but at the end of the day, it's their final decision. So all those kind of combinations combined to help me land on the name Exile. Okay, so once I had the name down, then it was really about how do I take the legal steps to create a company. And being based in Australia, that meant registering a company, a proprietary limited company with ASIC, which is our main body here, and then creating basically the legal structure of the production company. And one thing I would say is that if you are thinking about starting a production company, it's really important that you get both legal and tax advice. So tax advice from an accountant. And the reason that that's important is you want to make sure that you're setting up your corporate structure in the correct way and in a way that's going to be beneficial to you both legally, but also from a tax minimization perspective. I highly recommend if you're thinking about starting a production company, make sure you go and get that advice. So that was the next step for me. Having worked as a lawyer for a couple of years before starting my production company, I luckily knew how to set up a corporate entity. So the process for me was relatively simple. It was, again, just about getting that advice from the accountant and the lawyer, just about how to structure it in the right way. So that was the next step to setting up the production company. A simple one, but a very important one. So make sure you don't rush this part of it. So once I had the name and the corporate structure set up, the only thing left to do was to actually start making some money through the company. So the way that I did this, particularly in the first kind of 2 to 3 years of operating, was to split my time between projects that I was developing and financing and going to produce, so feature films, and work that was much closer to kind of freelancing or consulting. The reason that I did this is because when I started out, I didn't go and seek any capital. So there was no, capital that was coming into the business that would allow me to just focus on the creative projects, the feature films. And so I knew there was going to be, a long lead time to firstly making the first film. But even once I made the first film, I kind of could see that it would take a few years to really get the wheels turning and to have enough work coming in that would be where I'd be able to support myself ongoing. So that's the way that I did it for around the first 2-3 years. I split the time between the feature films that I was financing and producing, which weren't generating an income consistently, and freelance or consulting work that would allow me to keep generating cash flow, basically keep myself afloat financially. And so if you are thinking about starting a production company that is, either just a film or a TV or a film and TV production company, this is one really important consideration. Like, how are you going to generate income, particularly in those first few years when you're finding your feet, you're having to generate projects, you're having to generate finance, your cash flow is really lumpy. You might get paid once a year or a couple of times a year from those projects. And so in the meantime, you need to be generating cash flow. And look, even at the stage that I'm at now, which is kind of 6 years in, cash flow can still be an issue because projects are still lumpy. Or payments from projects are still lumpy. You do get better at planning these things out. You continue to find new sources of income as well that can keep cash flow going. So this is something that you should really think about if you're starting a film and TV production company. It's where is that constant cash flow going to come from in between the big payments that you're receiving for the projects? So yeah, that was the next step for me. It was kind of working out what the right balance was between the two, making sure that I didn't go too far into one or the other. And I think that's somewhere that you can really get stuck, either going too far into the income generation side or too far into the creative side, and both have their issues, right? You go too far into the income generation, your creative projects don't get any time, and then the whole reason that you started the business isn't getting any love. On the flip side, if you're spending all the time on the creative, then you're not looking after yourself financially. It becomes very stressful, and you also then can't actually complete your best work, or you can't really perform at your highest level. So that's a real issue as well. So finding that balance, it's not easy. It takes you a bit of time. But if you are starting your own production company, one of the things to think about is cash flow and how you're going to manage that. So I'm 6 years on now from having started Exile Entertainment, and I want to give you a quick recap of what we've been able to achieve, and as well as where we're at now. What are some of the difficulties that we're facing? What are some of the opportunities that are out there for us? So a few things that I want to run through. The first is, again, just going back to that cash flow issue, how long it kind of took me to be able to really be focusing on film production full time. It was definitely around 3 to 4 years until I was making feature films where the budgets were closer to $1 million. That's when I was able to start generating a much higher kind of producer fee from those projects. And that would allow me to really start spending more time on production and less time on generating income doing other things. Another thing that I did early on was actually start a distribution arm of Exile Entertainment. So that also assisted with cash flow. But one really great thing that it did for the production side is it exposed me to the distribution side of the business. It allowed me to build a really strong network through the distributors and sales agents, and really just understand how that side of the business works. So that was something that was, I think, extremely important during those first 2 or 3 years. And in a way, it was a bit of a survival mechanism because it was a way for me, again, to keep generating cash flow. And it was only once, again, the projects had become bigger that I then decided to really just focus on the kind of production and financing side. Over the past 6 years, we've been able to finance and produce and complete 4 feature films. We've helped another 4 close finance. That's either by EPing the project or co-producing. And then just this year, we've already shot and are in post-production on 2 projects. We're helping finance another one in post, and we're looking to get the next one into production in either November or January next year. So by the time that's done, we'll have financed and produced around 10 films in the space of about 6 years. And that's not including the films that are now getting financed through the accelerator. We've had films premiere at festivals like Venice, land on streaming platforms like Netflix, be released in multiple territories. But we still haven't had like that one film that's really just done extremely well commercially. As I'm getting to this stage now where, we're 6 years in, it's really now the focus going forward is going to be much more about how do we ensure that the films that we are producing and we're spending time on and spending resources on can be profitable in the long term, because if we're just going to keep relying on these one-off films and there's no additional revenue coming in, that's going to become hard to sustain that business over the long term. So that's something that as you're making films and you're kind of progressing, it just becomes something that is much more important. At the start, it's really about getting the films into production, learning how feature films are made, building up some credibility, building up a portfolio of work that will allow you to help get other work. And so that's the really important part at the start, and obviously generating income. At some point, you really have to be as well looking at the profitability. And ideally, you're much more across that at the start, but it is difficult when, the name of the game is survival and you're really focused on just getting films into production and getting those wheels turning for the business. So some of the opportunities and difficulties wise, look, it's, cash flow is always difficult to manage for a production business. That's something that I think is just part of it until you have either a really high volume or you have had one of those films that just goes kind of gangbusters, and that can allow you to start floating the company for a longer period of time. So that's one of the difficulties. Opportunities, I think now more than ever, there is much more money kind of in the ecosystem of the film industry, thanks to the streaming wars that are now going on. And so that's something that's really encouraging. As an independent producer, when I first started the company, it was kind of as Netflix was just coming in and DVD was just completely fallen away as a revenue stream. So there was a lot of hesitancy. There was, it was hard to get any MGs from sales agents. There was a lot of concern at the markets, whereas now I think things have really changed. And while the landscape is completely different, I do feel like it's a much more optimistic industry or marketplace. And so I think the opportunity is there that if you can be creating content, creating films, creating high quality films and TV, there are buyers there are avenues to exploit that work. So that's where we're at. Okay, so that's it for this video. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and also let me know what you thought about the video in the comments below. If you've got any questions for me, please throw them in the comments and I'll get back to you. I want to circle back as well to tell you more about our Producing Accelerator program. So that's a training program that takes filmmakers through the steps that we use to finance and produce our films consistently. So if you're interested in learning more about that program, check out the link in the description of this video and you can learn more about that program, how it works. There is a mentorship component to that program. We're very involved, we're very hands-on with the filmmakers that we're working with through the accelerator. So if you're hoping to get your film into production, if you're looking to start a production company, feel free to set up a time to speak with me or a member of my team. We'll tell you more about how it works, how we might be able to help you, and if it's the right fit. And as always, check out these videos next on how to up your filmmaking game.